What if I told you that the most famous rivalry in rock history wasn't really a rivalry at all? According to Keith Richards, when the Beatles and the Rolling Stones were preparing to release singles in the 1960s, they did something that was quite strategic and something that you may not have heard about. They were not enemies, they were not chart assassins, they were something else altogether. Let's listen in here to what Keith Richards had to say about the so-called competitive days of single releases.
We did, and you're sitting there and they're banging on the door for a new record, and the other one's only been out a week, and they're dancing, because there were singles in those days, 45s, every 12 weeks you had to have a new number one. So if you didn't, the chart, you were ruled by all that.
And the problem was Lennon and McCartney were doing it too, right?
Yeah, it could have been a problem if there was a competition, except that we used to go round to them and say, how you doing with the new one? And they say, well, the problem with the track, we're overdubbing and we haven't got the vocals on yet. And so they say, how about you? And we say, well, look, ours is nearly ready to go. And they say, okay, right, you go in now, and then we'll keep ours back 3 or 4 weeks. We know when we deliberately not clashed with each other. So that was some teamwork, really.
So for a long time, most people have assumed that the Beatles and the Stones had a rivalry in the charts. And this is true, of course, to some extent. But in the background, there was another story going on, which is they shared studios, they shared producers, and they even shared songs. Let's not forget that Lennon and McCartney wrote I Want to Be Your Man for the Rolling Stones in 1963, and that's not really a rivalry as much as it is a collaboration. So when Keith Richards is talking here about teamwork, it doesn't really surprise me, although it is surprising because we've been told this story for so long that they were in a cutthroat competition, and to understand that aspect of the story, you need to realize that in the 1960s, albums weren't as important as singles. Number one single wasn't just prestige, it gave you radio saturation, television bookings, and kind of cultural dominance. It got you booked into a lot of places, it made new fans. And so from 63 to about 69, the Beatles and the Rolling Stones were really working the UK charts, but according to Keith Richards here in that clip, they were doing it in predetermined alternating waves. I think this was more than a business strategy. I think there was real admiration going on between the two bands, and I think that the British invasion was more like a tidal wave of the Beatles and the Rolling Stones propelling all kinds of bands with them. And I think what I'm trying to drive at here is that they were conscious of this. I don't think that they sat around and planned it out, but I think that they understood that they were part of a larger cultural force, so it wasn't just about competition, but about letting the music out, letting cultural shift take place. And I think that's where it really gets interesting, because we all know and love the idea that rivalry can create greatness, and it definitely can. But cooperation also generates greatness and sometimes longevity. So instead of burning each other out by having a week-by-week chart war, the Stones and the Beatles pushed each other artistically without having commercial sabotage or direct confrontation. They were able to maintain mutual respect. Kind of had different lanes anyway. I'll have a video on that if you care to look it up. The Stones were much more blues-based than the Beatles and much less experimental. Now, what does this have to do with music today? Now it isn't weekly, but hourly. Who is dominating the algorithms? Artists avoid dropping albums on the same Friday that they know other artists are going to drop new material. Streaming windows and chart positioning is still slightly, if not wholly, based on timing. Back in the 60s, coordination required a lot of different people to make one release get off the ground. Nowadays, informed and canny strategists can accomplish this with a smaller team. But if we listen to Keith Richards' account, we get insight into something really interesting, which is that the Beatles and the Stones, at the peak of their fame, mutually chose sustainability over competition and ego. And that is a really fascinating reframe of this important aspect of rock history. So maybe the Beatles and the Stones rivalry wasn't a war. Maybe it was more like iron sharpening iron. But here's my question. Do you think they ever really were true rivals, or do you think that, as Keith Richards is suggesting here, they were more like strategic allies? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Music Guru here, asking you to help us on our march to 10,000 subscribers.